the first slave ships in America came here in 1619, landed in Jamestown. And it went on until really the 1850s. Keep in mind that the Atlantic slave trade, the slavery, was outlawed under the British Empire during the first decade of the 19th century. I think England outlawed it in like 1803 or something. That means that every slave brought to the United States after it was banned was brought really illegally. The southern states were smuggling slaves in from the Caribbean illegally. So tell me that the Civil War didn't need to be fought. The southern states were breaking the law and had been breaking the law for like 50-something years. We were sending slave ships down to Jamaica and Cuba, buying slaves at international auctions illegally and smuggling them back into New Orleans and Mobile and Charleston, and then selling them for $500, $1,000, $2,000 a head? Come on. Don't let anybody tell you the Civil War was not fought because of slavery. That was the whole reason it was fought. Everything else is just a good old boy argument, I call it. You know, oh, it's over states' rights. States' rights to do what? Illegally have slaves. Anyway, during this period, approximately 8 to 10 million African slaves were brought into the United States, either legally or illegally. And this is not an exact number because we don't have all of the records. You understand they didn't keep a lot of these records. This does not account for all the slaves that were never made it to the United States, never made it to the Western Caribbean, that died in transport or were just not processed, right? Folks, that's about a fifth of Africa's estimated population during this period. And this is not a guilt trip. I'm not trying to give you this information because I'm trying to tell you it happened. It's real. You know, it's kind of like those Holocaust deniers out there. I get really upset with that. You know, there's people that think the Holocaust didn't happen. Okay, I walked through a concentration camp. I've seen the gas chambers. It happened. It's real. Okay, it's like the people that don't believe COVID's real.
Right.
I had it. It's real. Okay, this happened. We learned from it so we don't do it again. Right? We study it so that we understand where the strife and conflict is coming from. I'm not saying you have to agree or disagree. I'm just telling you it happened so we learn about it. You know how kids in Germany learn about Nazis? Off the internet. Because the textbooks in Germany don't even teach World War II. They don't cover it. There's no mention of Hitler. So when the kids get on the internet and look it up, they're getting it off some far radical website. They're not going to, you know, some learned scholarly source for it, right? They're getting it from Jim Bob's History Guide and, you know, oh, Nazis are cool. They did some good things. I agree with no. So yes, it's happened. It's real. We study it. We understand. 8 to 10 million people, maybe a fifth of the total population of Africa, and most, 1/3, came from just 3 countries in West Africa: Ghana, Mali, and the Songhai Empire. You're not going to find the Songhai Empire on a map of Africa today. It no longer exists. It's been broken into about 5 or 6 other little countries today. But Mali and Ghana are still there. At one point before the Atlantic slave trade, these were 3 of the richest countries in Africa. Today, they're 3 of the poorest. What do you think that does to your infrastructure and economy, taking 1/3 of your best and brightest people away in chains? And yes, I know what people will say. Wasn't the slave trade already going on in Africa before? Yes, it was. But not to the extent and the numbers. If they were taken as slaves in Africa, they still stayed in Africa, right? But by taking the slaves out of Africa and bringing them to the New World, that means everything that's being built and produced here, that labor is not being returned back to Africa. Now, it took about a month to cross the Atlantic Ocean. This was called the Middle Passage. And conditions were horrible on the slave ships. And a lot of slaves jumped overboard, committed suicide rather than be taken captive back to wherever they were going. Most of them couldn't speak the language. I mean, if you're African from Ghana, you don't speak English, or you don't speak Dutch, or Spanish, or Portuguese. So you don't know where you're going. And not all were taken to the United States. Some were taken to the Caribbean, Central America, South America. Any questions about the Atlantic slave trade? Trust me, between now and the Civil War in December, we will talk a lot more about slavery and its effects on the United States. What they call it the other day on the news, the original sin, right? The old bloodstain in American history that nobody wants to talk about and everybody needs to learn from, right? But the thing is, we'll see that there's been a lot of other groups. I mentioned the other day that there were even some white slaves brought over. Remember the Irish? Thousands of Irish were taken from Britain and brought over here as slaves. The Native Americans were enslaved. So yeah, there's a lot of guilt to go around, but one of the things I don't like to do is put today's standards and values on people 200 and 300, 400 years ago, or even 2,000 and 3,000, 4,000 years ago. I know people say, well, it's always been wrong, it's wrong today, it was wrong back then. Yes, but the people back then didn't see it the way you and I see it now, right? So, unless we invent a time machine and we go back and educate them, all we can do is learn from it, right? And not so we don't do it again. I guess the closest thing to this today would be sex trafficking, right? Human trafficking is still going on, right? That's become the 21st century version of the Atlantic slave trade. How many people did they free down in Georgia last week? It hardly even made the news.
I think, it was like 30 kids or
something. 30 kids.
Yeah.
I'm a father. That's like the worst thing I can possibly think of. Okay, when you study history, you study a lot of bad things, and that gets my blood boiling more than anything is, kidnapping the kids and this. Anyway. All right, any questions about this stuff? And let's talk about something happy. The Salem witch trial. Speaking of sex trafficking, I know that's a hell of a transition, isn't it? You will edit this on the channel. I can't wait to read your closed captioning on this. Let's get off this economic history stuff, because I'm not an economic historian. I mean, it's important to explain why this was being done, how it was being done, but it's not my specialty. Let's do a little social, psychological history now. This is one of my favorite lessons to teach. People always say, what's your favorite part of history? And I say, all of it. But yeah, there's certain parts that, I don't know, just stick with you more than others, I guess. And the Salem witch trials is probably one of the most researched, written about, so many movies, so many documentaries, so many books made about the Salem witch trials. And just, why did it happen? What the heck was going on? Those crazy pilgrims. We certainly don't want this to happen again.
Yeah.
The difference. American listen to the time. We're on to the Salem witch trials. So I'll have a couple of questions about the Salem witch trials on the test. And the big one started in 1692. Now, there were other witch trials that happened in American history before this. There were even some that happened after this. But the big ones that we think of happened in probably January to June of 1692. And that, how many months is that? Somebody's better at math than me. 6 months?
Yeah.
Okay. In this 6-month time period, over 150 people will be arrested and imprisoned accused of being witches, and another 200 plus were accused. So, Mr. Lawyer, what's that conviction rate?
That's a pretty good one.
150 out of 200. I mean, that's 3/4, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody know what the burden of proof was to bring charges against someone for being a witch? In other words, how many collaborating eyewitnesses did you have to accuse someone of being a witch?
Just one.
Just one. Can all of us think of at least one person in our life that maybe doesn't like us for whatever reason? I know it's hard. I got a lot, but it only took one person, right? One person to bring charges. Now, we weren't burning people at the stake. That's more like Joan of Arc era. In fact, the Catholic Church and the Pope had already banned the practice of burning people. So if you watch a movie about the Salem witch trials and they're burning people, it's not historically accurate. If you watch them where they're all demon possessed and they're spirits, that one is accurate. No, I'm just. In Salem, 19 were executed.